high-level view, and you can see, one of the things that we like to remind people is that we're made up of different parts financially. So we have a general fund component as well as bond and T-SPLOST. Fortunately, the 2022 infrastructure package passed, so that will be another element that is added to our program. And so you can see last year was $53.4 million in our adopted budget. Roughly speaking, the Renew and T-SPLOST 1.0 are about $550 million. And then as you look at the second line here, I think a lot of times people forget just how big the city is. And so we have a lot of assets in the infrastructure. We have almost 1,000 traffic signals, 54,000 streetlights. I know we've talked a lot about streetlights. That number is going to be going closer to 60,000. And my favorite one is actually the 4,500 lane miles of pavement that if you took the lane miles and stretched them west, it would take you to Los Angeles and then turn around and bring you back. So we have a lot of pavement. There's a lot of pavement that we have to keep track of. So on the next slide, our operational plan is really fairly simple. We came into it with the attitude that we wanted to be excellent with the little things. And part of that is just being responsive to the needs of the community. And so we start every meeting and every discussion by saying safety is our business. That's the safety of our people, and that's the safety of the people who use our streets and our sidewalks. And so that's a very big deal for us. I know I've said this the last 2 years, but I'm going to say it again. I've been just pleasantly just amazed and surprised at the depth of talent we inherited from the Department of Public Works when we formed the DOT. We have some really magnificent leaders, some magnificent technical professionals, and have developed quite a strong team. And so you can see we have a keen focus on our staff. We're a people-first organization. And years ago, I was at a luncheon with the then CEO of Home Depot, and he talked about the most important person is the one on the floor who interacts with the customer. And we adopted that type model that we knew that many of us weren't interacting with the same regularity that the frontline workers were who were just getting the work done. And so our efforts were to support them and to champion them. At the same time, there's an opportunity that Atlanta had as we grow and urbanize to really, we called it, and maybe it's not the best phrase, we called it acting like a real city. And we were frustrated with the way people were using and abusing the public right-of-way, the way the pavement was getting sliced, the way sidewalks were being broken up. And so we tried, one, to be much more strict when it came to enforcing the right-of-way manual, trying to be more present when utilities were working to make sure that they did the repairs. And quite frankly, we would measure the effectiveness based on the complaints we got. And so that was always a good sign when people were saying, why are you twisting our arms so hard? Because it's really frustrating when you spend millions of dollars to repair a road and then within 6 months somebody's out there gouging a hole in it. I do think that's an opportunity for more discussion and consideration. But that was something that we looked at. And so even today as we roll out the pothole posse, we can say that the city's streets are overwhelmingly average. We have about 60% that are rated fair or worse. We've estimated that's about $1 billion just to address today's needs. Over half our city is missing sidewalks. That's roughly speaking another $1 billion. So there's a lot of work to do, but it still goes back to doing those little things correctly. And over the last 2 years, you've seen a shift in our approach to doing more in-house. And in the areas that we control, we move fairly quickly. If we don't need to go out for a third-party consultant or go out for a third-party contractor, we move very quickly. Our teams are able to get things done. Now they're smaller projects, but still that gives us some options as we look at advancing the city forward. And so we'll continue to have that focus on in-housing construction within our operations. So if we go to the next slide. We very intentionally have a flat organization. In fact, some of the members of my team will probably tell you that I've been very reluctant to publish a department-wide org chart because I was influenced early in my career actually by a book written by Coach Krzyzewski at Duke, where he said if you have too many rules, they just end up being used against you. So I didn't need people telling me what their job wasn't. We just needed problems to get solved. And so what happened over the last 2 years was people started realizing this is where my strengths align with the needs of the department. The other thing is that we really exist as a leadership team to serve those doing the work. And I think these vertical organizations oftentimes just lead to what an old boss of mine called the roll-up. We take spreadsheets and roll them up and then roll them up and roll them up, and what value is actually being added. And so we've run a very flat organization, and you can see some technical, some financial. And I wanted to run through this because even at the executive assistant level, we're vacant there, but I'm very proud because Arthur Blank stole our executive assistant at the Blank Foundation, and she's doing great things. And so I was personally torn up, but very excited for her. Alexis Waywu, but our DC of Capital Projects is someone I go back a long ways with in the industry, Jessica Fulton. She is just the consummate professional when it comes to project delivery. Really strong person there. The Deputy Commissioner over Mobility, Strategy, and Planning is Doug Nagy. He's a McKinsey guy. Actually, we poached him from City Planning a few years back. So he's been a great addition to our team. At the DC level within Transportation Infrastructure Management, that's really our operations and maintenance group. We have promoted Alan Smith into the acting deputy role. And I'll tell you, quite often, you all would call me to get something done, and I would just call Alan. And so in many respects, you're cutting the middleman out. You can just go straight to Alan now because he is a get-it-done kind of guy and is doing a great job. Our Chief of Administration, I think he's in the room here today, but Pierre Johnson has really taken a data-driven approach to our team and looking at what are the things we need to measure to improve our service delivery, knowing that improvement is continuous and that it's really a journey we're always going to be on. Director of Communications, Amy Williams, she's as good as they get. I was joking with her that quite often when she plans project-type events, the turnout is so overwhelming, and it's because she does such a nice job with those. But it's been a real strength of the team. Director of Administration and Finance, this is actually I would say almost an invisible hero within the team, Nicole Quarles-Thomas. A couple years back, there was an audit of Renew. And one of the items that didn't get any attention was that the Renew T-Splosh team was paying its bills in 30 days. And that is Nicole's effort. She's a process-driven person and has really cleaned up the way that we would receive invoices and pay them. And I think right now we're probably in the mid-80% with turning those around in 30 days. The other 15% are usually due to me holding them up, asking questions. So great job there. Director of Transportation Engineering, many of you know Nursif Kadir. We call him the Dean of DOT. And what we did is we actually took away his staff responsibilities and said, we just want your technical expertise in everything we do. And so he knows so much about the city, so much about code, is such a good engineer. We wanted him influencing everything from planning all the way into construction. He's done quite well in that. And then we also have our Director of Legislation, Kajar Anderson, who is also here today, and I really want to thank her because she's the one who helped me learn how the city functions and how we get things done within the city. And it's, it can be quite a daunting task coming in cold and trying to figure out how these things work, but just a really strong team, a very flat organization, and I hope it stays that way. Next slide. This is your engineer slide. We're known for putting way too much text on a slide and then reading it to you. I'm probably going to read some of these to you. So I want to go through some highlights because it's been a really good year for us. If you look at the first bullet point, this was actually under Mayor Bottoms. We had the action plan for safer streets. That's continuing to move forward. The pandemic disrupted it a little bit. We were going to use some parking funding for that. That's put us back a little bit, but the design continues forward on that. We've repaired nearly 4,000 potholes, nearly 4,000 linear feet of sidewalk. In fact, in the last 3 years, we've probably repaired nearly 20,000 potholes. And it's just, it needs to be done. It's an ever-present need, and our guys, they really get to it. Let's see, I won't read them all to you, but we were excited when the T-SPLOS 2.0 and bond went 15-0 through council. We are also very excited to see that the public support exceeded 80% when you looked at the three issues. So that's important, because one of the areas we talk about is that when it comes to general fund for DOT, that's really the basic operations and maintenance needs. These capital needs really need to financially come from other places. So bonding and T-SPLOS and other type funding mechanisms are going to be very important. Let's keep on moving down. About halfway down, you can see the completion of the MLK project. That was one that was just really important for us because of what it meant, and now to have a corridor that I believe is worthy of its namesake was a significant deal for us. And you can see quite a few as we go down. I'm actually very excited about the demolition of the Bankhead Bridge. That's one that I think the city closed it in the 90s, and we're finally tearing it down, and Path Foundation is working on a pedestrian connector through there that's going to connect Midtown into West Atlanta, and good plans there. I drove past it on the way today, Spring Street. I joked with the team, if something unforeseen happened to me, just sprinkle my ashes on Spring Street, because that was quite a difficult project. Who knew that our bridge had cancer? But we had to work through those issues with the federal government and some specialty consultants, but we're through the woods on that. And then the last two items really go back to the in-housing of our work. We had an interesting situation where some members of our team and their managers were frustrated with each other because our productivity was lacking. And as we assessed the situation, what we realized was we didn't have a personnel problem, we had an equipment problem. And so we replaced some outdated equipment with some pretty fancy sign printer, and I think we quadrupled our output just simply with an investment in equipment. And it also alleviated a lot of hurt feelings. And so that was part of our growing process, and realizing not only do we need to invest in our people, but we need to be looking at the equipment we use as well. And then the last one, same thing. We couldn't get anybody to bid on-call striping. And then when they did, they would give us a rate at 3 times the going rate. And so we decided, well, we'll just buy our own striping equipment. And so we now have 2 striping rigs, one for yellow, one for white. There's room for growth there, but we now have the in-house abilities to stripe everything that needs to be striped in the city of Atlanta. So as we project forward, much of this stuff because we've talked about it. I'll draw attention to really just a few items. The light up the night, not necessarily talking about the lights, but the methodology. That was an opportunity where the city leveraged an existing resource in our lights and selling them to Georgia Power to add more lights. And I think we have those opportunities that the DOT doesn't need to be all within the right-of-way. And that was an area we struggled with, just simply because we didn't have the resources. It wasn't because we couldn't do it or we didn't have good people. I mean, I was impressed that we had a team of 3 and 88% of our streetlights were functioning. But we were never going to grow with 3 people, and so we decided, well, that's something that we really should just give to the experts and reassign those 3 people. The other thing we did is we looked very closely at crash data and crime data in determining our locations. And I think we have more opportunities to do that type of approach. I know right now the team is mapping where do we have speed tables and where should we have speed tables. And in this new program, there's a pretty significant amount of funding for traffic calming. So these citywide approaches, veering us away somewhat from a one-off approach, is going to be really important as we go forward. And so you can see, in the pandemic, we were pushing on Vision Zero. We're still replacing speed limit signs. We're probably 80% of the way finished with that, but continuing to reduce to 25 miles an hour. And then you can see in this last box at the end, we're going to continue to move towards the in-house of work. I'll say one of the things in District 8, we had a small project. It was a sidewalk relocation. There was a gentleman who was struck by a vehicle. The sidewalk was in a bad spot, so we moved it, and we did all of the work, design and construction in-house. And so that required us actually to pour some ADA ramps that we don't typically do. And so I think there's a real opportunity with our concrete crews to get in and be doing these ADA ramps and looking at some of the accessibility issues. And we mentioned a few bullet points up that you know we're close to bringing closure to this ADA lawsuit that's been filed against the city, and we have mapped almost 5,000 missing wheelchair ramps. So there's funding for those ramps also in this new program, and so you're going to start seeing more of these citywide initiatives to address really significant needs, at the same time giving us the ability to do things in-house. And so one of the things I think you're going to see going forward, we're actually referring to our transportation infrastructure management team, which is the operations and maintenance team, more as our in-house construction. These smaller projects, say 200,000 and below, we can and should build those in-house, because we just did in 90 days what probably would have taken us 18 months to do if we had gone out to third parties to get that done. And I think we can continue to grow in those opportunities. We don't want to bite off more than we can chew, but very simple things we do well, and we get those done. So a lot on those slides, but let's move on to some of the key priorities. Yeah, we had gotten ARC to support our Vision Zero plan. We had planned to form a Vision Zero committee. The pandemic killed that just because our healthcare professionals had more important things to do. They were busy with the pandemic. We're getting back to that. So we've identified folks who we think would be key stakeholders in this effort, and you're going to see much more coming from the Atlanta Department of Transportation. I'll give a quick preview. You know, I had a good friend who's a communications consultant who said always alliterate, because then you can remember what you're trying to say. So Atlanta DOT, we have 4 values. And we've talked a lot about safety, and we know that that's our business and that's what we do. The second one is service, that at the end of the day we serve the public. The third one is stewardship, and I hope that's what you see in this presentation, is we don't have all the resources to do everything we want to do, but we get the biggest bang for our buck. And then the last one is speed. And that's where we're going to reside in fiscal year 23, is just how do we get things done faster? And I've just from the walkabouts I've had with the community, that seems to be the consensus, is why does it take you so long? And so that's why you're going to see more things shifting in-house, because the simple things, again, back to being excellent with the little things, we have great opportunity to crank that out in-house, and you're going to see more of that. And then at the same time, we're going to be looking at the new infrastructure package, and there will be essentially the creation of another team that has to manage that one. And so the benefit that we have is, and I've said this before, my 2 younger brothers always talk about how the first pancake is always the messiest one, and that's true with T-SPLOS programs. And so T-SPLOS 1 is moving. Cascade is in construction. DeKalb is going to be in full bore here in a few months. Joseph E. Lowry, Complete Street, was just sent down to procurement. Oh, good heavens, let's see. But the big projects are moving into construction, moving into procurement, which then buys the time that you need to start ramping up the second program to get these things designed. There's been some pressure to short-circuit things in design. I would encourage you not to do that. We've backed up, learned our lessons from some other projects, that get the design right, design it to budget, move your utilities, and build it. And let's stop having projects that end up being 3 years late. Projects that we're finishing today that should have been done before the Super Bowl, whenever that was. I can't even tell you who played in that game in the last one. So much, and the two go together, because many of these Vision Zero initiatives are going to need changes to the infrastructure. And the other thing that we've talked about is, can we look at areas that have high crash density or maybe have experienced fatalities, and what are the things that we could do now just ourselves? Maybe it doesn't completely solve the problem, but if it makes it incrementally better, let's do that. And we've actually visited a few sites, and it's really quite sobering to read the police reports and then to look at what happened and then identify half a dozen items that we actually could do that would make the site safer. And so that's an area that I really want to see grow really well into the future. Next slide, we get into some data for you. I hit on this earlier. I won't talk a whole lot, but we've got a lot of stuff in this city. A lot of signs, a lot of sidewalks, a lot of lights, and you can see how much we repaired on the far right. I'm always amazed, though, at the bottom, how many inspections we do in a given year. Nearly 14,000 inspections. And really anything we do now, especially on the 311 side, everything's a pothole, even if it's a sewer manhole or a utility cut, but we send an inspector out. And they're quick to get out. They make good assessments, and that enables us to make decisions. But 14,000 is a lot of inspections. Now we can talk a little bit on the financial side. On the far left, I draw your attention to the adopted numbers because you can see Atlanta DOT is stair-stepping up. So our year one was about 48 million, year two was 52, and now we're about 58. I like that approach because it really allows us to measure our productivity, measure our need, and then kind of ease into it, where it's not too much too soon. We had what I called year zero, where we took the parts that were going to become DOT and we just started acting like DOT even though we weren't an official department, and I think we left $6 million on the table. Our first year we left about $1 million on the table. This year we're leaving nothing on the table. So now we're learning how to turn our budget into projects. And that's important because it's hard to come and say, I need more, or here's what we need, when we're not actually delivering. The other thing that has helped us, I would remind everyone, was the creation of the Transportation Infrastructure Trust Fund, because the fiscal deadline was a problematic artificial deadline that was really producing some silly results, all in the name of getting money spent. Our projects don't know the July to June schedule, and many of them last longer than a year. And so now we're able to work in a more planned out approach to get this money spent. So, but you can see we're stair-stepping up nicely. When we were planning for DOT, Jacob Zagabe and I did some quick math, and if we could get everything we asked for, we were at 62 million. So we're not far from that. So I think we're in a very strong place financially. You can see the head count. It's actually slightly higher when you count the T-SPLOS positions. We have some people that are in that program. So all in all, we're about 380. And so that's going to take another jump as we look at the 2.0 program. But I'll tell you, probably something we should add going forward, especially with the T-SPLOS, is what does that translate into as percent overhead on these programs? That was an area we really focused on initially, was how do we drive that number way down. It really needs to be in the 10% range, and that's very doable. We ran at 8% for a while, so we know how to get the overhead down. This slide, next slide, is just a summary of the budget. I don't know that we need to cover a whole lot. You can see we simplify this within our team by saying our budget is people, lights, and projects. So, and we want to take care of folks in that order. And so if the people are taken care of, we're really pretty happy. And then we move forward trying to address the other items. So not only are our people taken care of, there's funding in here for raises for DOT, which is overdue and much appreciated. So we're happy to see that. There's an additional amount that's funded for the additional streetlights. That is essentially a 10-year interest-free loan from Georgia Power that we're paying back over 10 years, and we have that budgeted. And then at the project level, that holds pretty constant with where we were last year, which I think is a good place because we've actually absorbed a couple of emergencies within this current budget. Cheshire Bridge was one, the winter weather activation was another. And so I feel positive about where we are there. But again, to really just simplify Atlanta DOT, we go through and just say, let's look at the people, let's look at the lights, and let's look at the projects. And that's what these last couple of slides will hammer home for you. So you can see within the categories where we're spending the money. So the people side, and you can see we have $1 million that's in there for raises. When you see the supplies line, that really is paying the light bill. And so we have some other items that fall in there, but that's predominantly the light bill. Contracted services are our general maintenance contracts, the local match we need for LMIG, Russell Landscaping, which does a lot of the medians and gateway work. We finally have them back under contract, so hopefully some calls will stop with key areas. And then you can see sidewalks and speed tables, and then just other things as needed, things like bridge joints and smaller items like that. And so the last slide, I hope I am not out of order here, but we refer internally to the Transportation Infrastructure Fund as shook bucks. And this is a breakdown of how that money is spent. So in a given year, it's 15 million, and this is where we break it down. The item that I would share that I think is generally brings the most attention is speed tables. Most years that's 500,000. We've bumped it to $1 million because we think the need is there, and so it's when we go to a third-party contractor for speed tables, it's not the most efficient system, but we have a list right now of legislated and approved speed tables. We will start the process the minute the budget is approved to procure it, and then we end up next spring doing the construction. So you see a wave of work from March to June, and then that cycle repeats itself. I know a lot of people are thinking once it's approved by council, how many minutes before we start work, and it's just that's not the case. So we want to temper those expectations. But you can see this is the breakdown within the plan. We're actually bringing bridge maintenance down a little bit because there's bridge funding in the bond, but it seems like once a year we have a bridge we have to deal with, and I don't foresee that being any different next year. But it's a balanced approach. This hits the basic operational needs from a transportation perspective. I would say I don't know that the city's been in a stronger posture. This is a good budget. The Renew and 1.0 T-SPLOST are moving, and then another $750 million estimated for the 2.0 program. That on top of a lot of attention at the federal level. I think Atlanta's really postured well to advance projects over the next 5 to 8 years, and so that wraps it up for me. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. We have Mr. Winston and then Mr. Wan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Rowan. First, we just want to thank you for your service. You've taken a department in its infancy stages and has grown it and has become one of the most popular ones in our city, and we thank you for your service and are very sad to see you leave the city of Atlanta, but want to wish you well in your future endeavors wherever they may be. As an honorary member of the Pothole Posse, I've been really excited to see a lot of the work that's been done in the city. One question I had is taking a look at the budget, where we look at the personnel numbers. Do you have a percentage of where we are with the contracted services as a proportion of that?
As far as what's been spent, or
no, just the FY23 projected on that page. It doesn't say. It doesn't show contracted services.
So kind of a general rule for DOT will be roughly, and this is based on this year's numbers, but it's about 20 million for people, 15 million for lights and other items, and then 15 million for we combine contracted services and design together. So that's really our outsourced work. That should be about $15 million.
Okay. And, as I look at this budget and just thinking about, the next fiscal year, I know one of the first conversations that you and I had in early January when I came on board was, I think that there's, and you've spoken a lot about how, unfortunately, slow things happen in ATL DOT. It's just the nature of the world, procurement, the way things are kind of operating. One of my questions to you was, what was one of the most fastest things that we could do to show our constituents in the city that we're working for them. And I think the first thing you told me were stop signs. And I know we don't like to use stop signs as traffic calming measures, but, you know, I'm really excited about the fact that you're taking so many services in-house. And I think that's probably one of the best things that we can do as an ATL DOT is making sure that we have the personnel to be able to do things in-house, because it speeds up the process of being able to show, you know, citizens of Atlanta that we are able to do that work. Do you think the budget is commensurate of being able to, you know, be able to ramp up a lot of those in-house services in FY23?
Yes, sir, I do. And in fact, I think we're at a critical juncture where we can look at the expected output. What are we trying to do? So, you know, keep in mind that things like speed tables and potholes, we do both in-house, but we do them with the same people. So they're not doing those items simultaneously. The signs, I know right now it's not necessarily a function of the sign crews themselves. It's the function of the ability to get our hands on the materials. And so we have those opportunities to scale up. I think it's sufficient for next year what we have, but I do think we should be looking at where can we grow these opportunities. I know we put together an ad hoc project team just looking at, you know, when we go walk, like Gammon Street, that it really just becomes a very simple project. Mm-hmm. We now have a list with about 18 of those types of projects. I think that's going to continue to grow, and as it grows, then we need to be assessing, you know, what labor, what materials, what equipment's needed. As we sit here today, we can handle what's before us. It may not be true 2 years from now. It certainly won't be true 3 years from now, and that's if we're doing it correctly.
Sure.
And so we just need to continue to deliver. And much like the stop signs, I've told the story before. It was a sunny day with Councilmember Hillis and then Councilmember Dickens. And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, 3 all-way stops. You know, who's going to be impressed by that? And then I see all the social media posts and the neighborhood newsletters, and they were just ecstatic. But they were ecstatic because they saw their city serving them. And so where we have those opportunities to serve, we need to pounce on them. And our guys are really capable of delivering. I'm going to bet you in 2 to 3 years, you're going to see, well, we probably need to grow 15%. And along with that, I believe there's an opportunity for an apprentice type program. Bring people in, maybe overstaff some jobs, let them learn, and kind of, I'm more of a believer of slow growth. I think you can actually choke out the progress if you try to do too much too soon.
And to that same thought, you know, I had an opportunity to tour your facility down in Southeast Atlanta. You've got a lot of specialized personnel. You know, is there any thought of doing more cross-training? For instance, when I was there visiting with the mayor, you know, we were able to meet with, you know, 4 guys that didn't do the traffic signal repair, but that's 4 guys for the entire city of Atlanta. So, you know, that number just doesn't seem to add up to the amount of workforce that we need.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the hardest positions to fill. So those were the guys who were on staff. We also have a handful of open requisitions trying to recruit those positions. And what we had decided was, as a team, was that was actually the area we should focus on for an apprentice type program. And just, I spent 10 years on the consulting side doing that type of work. What was really exciting to me was how eager our guys were to teach. And so I think that's an immediate thing. You know, you could get, and it's not big numbers, get half a dozen people to come in as apprentices. It's low level voltage, so it's not high risk. I've joked before that I've programmed traffic controllers and have swapped them out. So if I can do it, anybody can. And it's really pretty neat work, because as the automotive industry goes more towards connected and autonomous vehicles, it's really going to be quite an exciting place to be. What's happening in the traffic engineering world is the most exciting in centuries. And so it's good work, it's good opportunities, and I do think that's an area that we can expand upon. Unfortunately, I never closed the deal on that. I didn't get us to the point that was operational, but it's right there in front of us.
And then, there's no secret. Atlanta's a car-centric city, but, a lot of people are starting to look at sustainable modes of transportation. A couple of my colleagues, myself, we ride bicycles and, try to do that a little bit more. And I know that, as we start look at, protected bike lanes and the technology behind that, and research has shown that the more barriers protection is going to be better for the protection of people. We've become this flex pokes kind of city where, where we see them put up as kind of a stopgate, but they don't really equate to real protection when it comes to looking at some of our bicycle lanes around the city. Is there a push for that in the budget to make sure that we're doing more to protect our pedestrians and bicyclists around the city of Atlanta?
Yes, sir. Not only in the budget, but in this second program that's moving forward. One of the challenges that we've had, and it really just comes down to the traffic engineering specifications that we have to follow. Quite often, we don't have enough offset to do a harder type barrier. If I had my way, I'd be putting those portable Jersey barriers up everywhere like we did around Grant Park. Generally speaking, cars don't mess with those. People have learned to drain the water-filled barricades, and then they go, throw them in a ditch, or we actually have them stolen, which is interesting. You weren't in office, but we did a pop-up lane closure on Piedmont with our water-filled barricades, and within 3 weeks, they were scattered all over the yard. And I was even noticing them on some of the development sites, like, oh, look, Atlanta Department of Transportation on a private development. But we've looked at Toronto, and they have a smaller concrete barricade that they use that we're very intrigued by. We've also worked with Central Atlanta Progress. If you go on Peachtree Center, those design lines, steel rails, they've been very durable, but they still take a beating. And so I've been amazed, one, at how durable they are, but two, how bad a beating they take. And so the cars show them no mercy. So it's going to have to be something pretty beefy. But I do think you make a good point, because it's that shifting priorities. And I look at myself, I'm the equivalent of maybe a sixth grade bike rider. I'm not the hardcore get out in traffic guy. I want to hang back and be out of traffic, and if I don't feel safe, I don't ride there. Sure. And so I think you've hit on something very important, and we've continued to look at what barricades could protect the pedestrians, could protect the cyclists. We actually keep coming back to the granite curb like we have over on Portman. That seems to be it's a sturdy enough barrier that it's a deterrent to the cars. The flex posts, you might as well just empty the box and just throw them all over the street, because that's where they end up. They're terrible, and we hate them. So that's certainly a work in progress.
And then last question for you. Obviously we have a lot of state routes that go through the city of Atlanta that are again, we're seeing inundated with a lot more cars and vehicles, and there's been lots of questions around where does the maintenance fall between ATO DOT or Georgia DOT. Are we starting to address some of those issues and finding out kind of who's responsible, and if it does fall on GDOT, how is that relationship in us being able to kind of push them to make sure that they're doing some of the maintenance stuff that they need to on some of those state routes?
Yeah, so you really have two issues on the state routes. The basic operations and maintenance is defined in state code 32-2-2, and unfortunately, GDOT's very quick to remind us of that. And in a nutshell, it basically says from edge of pavement to edge of pavement, GDOT's responsible for the quality of the pavement. We're responsible for everything else. And so that's an area that I'll try not to get myself in trouble here on camera, but it needs to be looked at more closely, which means the city is responsible for sidewalks on state routes. And I think that's troubling. Now, we've had a number of just excellent sessions with GDOT to rally around safety. And so we started on Donnelly Hollowell, and now we've talked a lot about Moreland Avenue. And I think those are, priority 1A and 1A prime. And if those aren't public health crises and transportation, I don't know what are. We just updated the crash and fatality data for the past 5 years in the city, and Moreland Avenue looks like somebody took a yellow highlighter and just highlighted the whole thing. And it makes it tough because by statute, it's truck route. Then to be a truck route, it's designed to maintain heavy vehicles, which means the geometry is such that cars can go fast. 3 years ago, we met with GDOT, and they made a comment that we may find ourselves where we reach a day where the city comes to the state and says, we'd like to take a road off system. I don't think we're far from that day, because they are, by their charge, they are about moving cars through a corridor. We're more about quality of life and safety and really having a walkable, livable city versus having our city streets being commuting corridors. That's where we are today, and that's, I think, where the fight's going to continue for quite some time to come. And Moreland's a very good example of that.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Rowan. You on my time.
All right, we have Juan Hillis and Norwood lined up.
Let's see if I can break Shook's record of keeping everybody on time by gumming up with questions. I'm kidding. I'm going to start with kind of very high level, just policy, philosophy conversation, and then get a little more granular in terms of specific budget things. I guess your theory and your approach to the work in terms of our infrastructure and our built transportation environment, if you were to say what the ideal kind of split is between, I kind of bucket them in, you've got maintenance, you've got repair because it's beyond maintenance, it's broken, it needs to be fixed, and then you've got new. What would be the optimal kind of level of activity or percentage breakout of each? And then the follow-on question is, what do you think the budget that you have before us, not including the T-SPLOST, that's just a big kind of outlier, but does it match, or where doesn't it match?
Yeah, so it's hard to hit the split. I remember I received a question from a council member, and he said, if you were to address the city's paving issues in 1 year, how much of it would you need? And I said, all of it. And so now you can start dividing that by the number of years to reach it. And so I think we're at that point that to do so one, I don't think we need a lot new. I don't think we need new lanes. We may need some new bridges, and we may need some new sidewalks. And I know we've produced some numbers about 1.5 years ago that showed the need for sidewalk repair and new sidewalks, roughly speaking, $1 billion, pavement, roughly $1 billion, and bridges, $500 million. So we're in that $2.5–3 billion range. I don't think that will ever be addressed through the general fund side. And I think that's what makes this a challenge, is that, you know, to a lot of people, you hear $15 million for infrastructure, and that sounds like a lot. But when you compare it to the $3 billion you need, I mean, my grandkids will never see it. And so then it's, what are the things we do? I think T-SPLOST is very important. I think we have opportunities to look at things like how we charge for parking, where we charge for parking. I know the dreaded congestion pricing, you know, you don't want to step on that third rail. But really, it's the users need to pay. And that's the philosophical question, is the users need to pay. And I would venture to say 80% of our users don't live in the city of Atlanta. I've complained from day one that we are a regional hub, and that funding formulas that are based on lane miles of street and nighttime population really hurt the city of Atlanta. When you look at a 5.5 million person region going to 8, and they're all coming into Atlanta for some reason, and then in a pre-COVID year, 15 to 16 million tourists, we have issues that some of these suburban cities do not. And so, you know, how do we keep taking the pounding and put that on essentially on the citizens of Atlanta? I don't know that that's sustainable or ever going to work. And so then how do we start looking at how do you make the users pay? And so that's kind of been my philosophy has been, I like the T-SPLOST because it spreads it out, and people who come to Atlanta to shop are paying for it. So you're getting $1 worth of benefit for, I don't know, 60, 70 cents probably. But then there are the things like parking. You know, we have 3 million parking spaces for every man, woman, and child who lives in the city of Atlanta. And everybody thinks that parking at the curb is a God-given right, and that free parking is another, you know, on the 8th day, God created free parking. And we're going to have those hard discussions that these are areas that can pay for the things we need, like accessibility improvements to our sidewalks. And so they're not simple conversations. They're not easy changes. Some may require changes with state code, but I almost think we need to say all the CapEx need, we shouldn't even be, the goal should be not to even look to the general fund budget. That needs to come from someplace else. So then general fund becomes that mix of the repairs, the bridge joints, the potholes, the cracked sidewalks, the knocked down signs, an area that I never really was able to be successful with, but things like asset recovery. As many cars that run over our stuff, we should be filing claims. I was saying I would like to hire 2 attorneys at DOT to just go file claims against auto insurance. That's $6 to $8 million a year. And so, these little things start adding up. But I think the challenge that we've had has been, if you look at just something simple like the LMIG paving, we set aside about $4 million every year. GDOT will match us about $6 million, so we get $10 million. But that's 30 miles out of 4,500 lane miles of street. So we're fighting the losing battle there. And I know that CFO Bala and I, when we were at the town hall in District 5, we were really working with the group to help them understand that you're not going to get $1 billion worth of paving out of the general fund. It's got to come from these other areas, and it's just the scale that we're dealing with, and it's really a generational thing. As a young engineer, I was assigned to a neighboring jurisdiction, and they had a goal: sidewalks on one side of the street, every street in 25 years, and they've just about done it. And I remember sitting there thinking, 25 years? Are you crazy? Why can't you do it faster? But that was about how long it took. And I think that's the commitment the city has to be making. So I like the split we have for today just for maintaining, but you start looking at things and your district's experiencing it. You get one gas line catching on fire on a bridge, and now you're dumped on your head scrambling trying to pay for things. So I think the discussion should move towards what are the other areas that the users, especially the non-resident users, can be pitching in for the infrastructure that they enjoy every day.
Yeah, I think you're getting at my concern about this, not this budget, but in general, is that we're spending so much on repair and not enough on maintenance. I mean, the LMIG money really is on repair because we're going after the worst streets in the worst condition, whereas if we invested in maintaining what we had, those streets, in theory, might not get to the condition they're at that costs more. It's like a house, a roof leak. Yeah. You got to repair the leak unless you're willing to wait until the water damage adds in it's an exponential cost.
You make a great analogy, and it's one that we use. We've often referred to the pothole repair as the blue tarp. Mm-hmm. How many tarps do you put up there before you have to rip the roof off? And so, but that becomes a resource question. Yep, exactly. And and for many of our streets, and it makes it doubly hard because quite often we get calls about potholes that aren't potholes. It's a totally failed section of roadway.
Exactly.
So back to the roof analogy, we can't just patch it. The whole thing's shot. And I think we're at that point of time that we do have to look at how do we hit these bigger funding levels, pass that on to the user so that we can sort of collectively lift those assets back up.
I think that's fair. In terms of the key priorities that you have, one of them is deliver transportation projects faster and more efficiently, and maybe you might, with your in your final days, might be at liberty a little bit more to give us an honest reflection of what you think the keys to that are. I mean, I might point towards procurement. I might you've talked about kind of looking at design and spending more time in design before execution, but your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the playbook that we used on the Renew side. And then there's some things we learned along the way. So the first one is you always need as much competition as you can get. And it was deja vu for me to see a handful of design firms on call that at the end of the day weren't even managing to a schedule. And so we came in and said, well, we're at least going to hold you to the budget. Are you designing to budget? And then what is your fee as a percentage of construction? And so that's why now I think it's moving towards, you move through committee, that you have our A&E on-call with 14 firms on it. And that's 14 firms with 14 DBE joint venture partners and 14 portfolios of DBE subs, but it gives you choices. I did that with another client as a consultant, and our price went from about 18% of construction to 7%, and we never mentioned price. Our schedule designs were happening about 60% faster. So I think there's accountability needed the minute you start. When is this design going to be finished? Is it designed to budget? We had one of our projects that I won't name, but we literally got a 90% set of plans that at best were 30. I went through 3 project managers on that job because it was just so poorly done. So it's that, you know, if you start right, that gets you in the right posture. I've said this before, and I don't want to be the procurement hater, and I'm not, but you have to look at the whole process. I call it the contracting process. So we measured from the moment we give a trigger package to DOP to the minute that an NTP comes back out of DOP. And so that means we have a hand in this as the user department, the procurement people have a hand in it, law has a hand in it, risk has a hand in it, now iPro has a hand in it, and it comes before you with council and ESCO, the mayor's office. So there are a lot of moving parts. For us to do that perfectly, it takes 8 months.
Yeah.
So I think there are some simple changes in there, that, and I say this pretty confidently because I had some team members at a former company who went through this exact same exercise with the New York City Department of Transportation, and with some fairly simple tweaks, they went from 9 months to 6. And I think we have those type opportunities. So as we move into construction, there's this intense public pressure to be seen doing something. And there was one point where I was asked on a project I won't name, but it's in District 11 and it rhymes with Mascade, to just go park some equipment out there. I said, why would I ever do that? Well, the public needs to think we've started. And my comment was, I don't think they're that dumb. And so the best comment was actually Councilmember Bakhtiari's event a few weeks ago where somebody said, stop doing groundbreakings and start counting the ribbon cuttings you do. And I just wanted to hug the gentleman because that's how I feel. And so construction's often counterintuitive, but if you look at the MLK project, the singular thing that went wrong was that project started before the utilities had been coordinated. Had the utilities been moved out of the way, it would have had a 3-year delay. But there's that intense pressure that you got to show me something, but then you kind of do something dumb. The challenge that I've given my team, and I'll share it today since, as you say, I'm maybe a little more verbose than I normally would be. I said, put on your shoes and then try to put on your socks. You generally have to take your shoes off and then do it the right way. And that's what we found on a lot of our construction projects, was we had taken it to a point where it had just stopped. And then we had to back up and do it the right way. So if you have time to do it wrong and then go back and do it right, just do it the right way from the start. So there are opportunities in all phases, all phases.
I think that's fair. But you kind of teed up my last kind of policy question before I dive into the specifics. So this budget book was prepared before the voters approved the T-SPLOS. So those numbers don't flow through here just yet. And so it'll, I was reminded by finance, once the bond issuance happens, we'll have those numbers and there'll be essentially another set of budget staffing and all that for those projects. Based on what you said, however, and without the knowledge of that in front of us, is there thought, is there benefit to, at least in this first year, doubling up? I mean, really doubling up, intensifying the resources, both design, in-house, all that, to do everything you just said, design right, so that we're not, we're now in year 6, 7 of the original issuance of the voter approval. So, I mean, is that being contemplated? Is that the right approach based on what you said? And is it going to be done?
Yeah. So if let's address the first program first. when you go back even to day one, we met with the Georgia Highway Contractors Association and said, what would it take to get more firms to come bid our work? And they told us, well, number one, you don't pay your bills. Number two, your contracts are terrible. And number three, your DBE program stinks. We hate it. And so we went back and we said, here's what we'll do. We will work on paying our bills. And now we pay net 30. We will clean up our contract, and we did. We now have much friendlier contracts that don't put all kinds of crazy risk on our vendors. And the crazy thing, too, was we were really putting the risk on the diversity vendors, the diversity subs. They were the ones having the worst time with it. And then we told them, we're pretty proud of the DBE program. Just learn to manage it. And so they said, well, that's going to be extra cost for us to manage it. And we said, we don't care. Just learn to manage it. And I think once that message was sent, they realized, okay, the playing field is leveling here. So if you look at the last couple of bids, like the LeMig paving that just came in a few weeks ago, I hesitate to say this, but we got bids that were $1.5 million lower than our budget. And this was from a firm who 5 years ago was charging us 2.5 times market rate to pave. And what they told us was that now you just let us pave. And they've come to the realization that we're happy to bring in all these subs because now you just let us work. And we know what to expect from you. And so you look at some of the other projects, even the Bankhead Bridge. We have E.R. Snell doing that work. E.R. Snell said they would never come back to the city of Atlanta. Cheshire Bridge, we got bids from Archer Western. I mean, so what's exciting to me is the bigger players are coming back, but where the need is in some of these smaller subs. I told my wife, I said, you may have to go start a subcontracting company because there's so much opportunity here. But that's an area of real growth opportunity with the city. So with the 1.0 program, most everything has moved through design, and that's the frustrating part as it took so long. And I'll give credit where credit is due. Councilmember Westmoreland said, I know what you say about utilities, I know what you say about right-of-way, but why has it taken so long? Well, it took so long because we had to take designs and throw them in the trash and do them over again. And so that was a source of delay, but we didn't want to go into construction with these half-baked plans. So most of those are now moving into construction. And I feel good about where we are with the contracting community because you have now a slug of $120 million worth of projects, ample opportunity for the contracting community. We're a very attractive target right now. On the design side, we were very worried about this 2.0 program because it's more smaller projects. And that's why when we put out our on-call and we started looking at the scoring, you had 14 reputable firms that were within 10% of each other scoring-wise. We had no clue how to differentiate one from the other, and so we just said, you know what, they're all good firms. They've all proposed good people. We can match them up with the projects, select them all. So now you have 14 firms, 14 teams, which really at the end of the day is probably more like 60 firms as you go into this program. So you're not concentrating the risk into what used to be 5 on-calls, but through mergers and acquisitions, it really became 3. And so there weren't a lot of choices, and that's what we had tried to do, is at least create choices and competition so that the city can actually, heaven forbid, go to a bridge designer to design a bridge, and can go to a traffic engineering specialist to do traffic engineering. And so I feel good about where we are there. And then the thing that we have to do in the next couple of months is just the basic blocking and tackling. The cash flow for the program, and it's like working a puzzle. Update those project budgets and make them fit within that cash flow.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the lessons you've learned would be smart for us to, again, I would encourage us to really do the intense pre-work during this period as we're finishing up the construction from 1.0 so that we're ready as soon as those are done to go.
Completely agree.
Full throttle up. All right, so one final question, and that's more about the budget. I'm looking at the page that you have in terms of that does all the line items, and it does not match what's in the budget book. And I don't know if you made a comment about that. I mean, we're talking supplies in the budget book says it went down by $600,000. In here, it's up $3 million. So it's almost a $3.6 million swing. So I just want to know which one we should be looking at.
Look at the budget book. I'll figure out what we did
Okay.
here. This was one we populated early in the process. Things move around. Like I said, at the end of the day, we're happy with the increase to 58. We actually look at purchase services and supplies as the same thing. Mm-hmm. We flip flop around between those pretty regularly.
Yeah. Okay. Because what I was trying to do was just see, I really like the strategy that you've implemented about trying to build the capacity in-house.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, it's also a counter to any problems that you have in terms of procurement. And if if we can do it in-house, we drive and we've got control over it. And I just want to see, is there a commensurate? I see you're increasing your staff, hopefully building apprenticeship, but obviously you would need supplies as well.
To get to that question, for this coming year, our focus was more on the retention side.
Okay.
And that we really pressed hard, and that's why we're very happy to see the amount that was allotted for raises, because it's easier to keep the people we have and keep them moving. And then my philosophy has always been elevate from within and plug the holes at the bottom. And that's what we've really tried to do. And you've seen quite a few people within DOT over the last few years be promoted because we invested the time and training into them. And we were, I think at the end of last year, our retention was 91%, and we want to keep it there. And the buzzards are outside circling. They certainly are. But we have some strong folks. And I will say our motivation this year was not necessarily staff growth, but it was retaining the ones we have and paying them appropriately.
Those are all my questions. I do want to echo what Councilmember Winston said. My biggest regret is that our time here overlapped only a short period of time. I'd heard great things about you coming in. I was looking forward to kind of rolling up my sleeves, having more of these policy conversations, but also figuring out our path forward on both 1.0 and 2.0. Look forward to seeing what you're going to do next. It'll be great things, and we appreciate everything you've given to the city.
And I won't be far away. Call me if you need anything.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Rowan. We'll start out, you mentioned and went over some of this. I came in a little late. So you mentioned LMIG. Remind me, this is 20 that we got the bids back for?
Well, yes, sir.
And the local part of that funding will come out of FY22 or 23?
22.
Okay.
So
then that leaves us.
20 and 21 are already. No, 20 is already funded.
Okay. So
21 is going to bid.
Okay. 21 will come out of FY23.
Correct.
Or do we have a draft list for 22 yet? And when?
No, we don't. We're working on that. We just submitted the draft. So typically we submit the list to GDOT in February. And so it'll be closer to the end of the year before we have that nailed down. But, like you and I have talked in the past, of avoiding some of those streets that serve two houses and focusing more on arterials and collectors. So you're seeing the change in that approach as we go forward.
And so the 22, is any of that local funding in this budget, or will that be? The goal, I hope, is to get the years lined up back with the actual years.
So you're always going to be about 1 year off phase because of just the way GDOT does it and the way our budget works. But our goal was to get caught up. Once we get the 21 procured, we're, for all practical purposes, caught up. We were back in February and March paving on the 2019 program. So we're going to complete 2 of them this year. The third one will get procured later this year.
And when will residents start to see the 20 getting done? When will the contractors activate?
So I believe there's some legislation going forward to amend some funding items. So that'll be a July type start.
And as you, of course, know, how we prioritize this is done with our studies, ground penetrating radar, et cetera. I believe it's been 3 or 4 years since that was done. Is there any updates? When do you like to see that update? Over 5 years? Or?
5 years is probably sufficient. I mean, we've taken a shift where we're watching the arterials and collectors more closely, and not that we don't care about the local roads, but, we made the shift where the city had for years paved the worst first. And what brought it to our attention was we were in Home Park paving a couple side streets when 10th Street looked like somebody had torn it up with a backhoe. And it's like, how did we not get 10th Street? And so we're watching, and those are also more expensive fixes. So we've deviated a little bit from that worst first, and we're also looking at the elements of risk as well as what volumes do they carry, which is bringing us to more of an arterial and collector first approach.
Gotcha. And maybe this is partly a question for you, maybe a question for AIM, but with our progressive adoption of the Vision Zero, et cetera, and truly addressing the most serious of our problems. I know when I make decisions for my district, and I'm sure my colleagues do too, we want to see some hard data.
Right.
But Atlanta, at least historically, has not put a whole lot of the data online. So whether it's where are the street lights on our streets, where are the most dangerous intersections, things like that. So is the department moving in that direction, and how does this budget help do that?
Yeah, so we have a very robust data team and GIS team. And what I would say is the last couple of years we've spent collecting the data. So even in my case, anytime something comes up, I like the heat maps of the crash data. I use those pretty regularly. We're working through what can we push out through the website, make available through GIS. Most of it is available in GIS. So even now it's as simple as just making the request. Like I mentioned a minute ago, we've updated the 5-year crash data. That's what we think is really most important, where we've talked about how can we get into tracking near-miss data. There are some opportunities out there. We're not quite there yet. But from a data perspective, we have probably anything you can ask for. Is it available publicly through the website? No, it's not yet available, but you ask us for it and we'll get that to you.
All right. And as I'm the always stop king, but me and my seatmate here were the traffic calming king and queen, and I see that there's $1 million in this budget for speed tables, traffic calming. But then there's also one of the line items in T-SPLOS is $2 million for traffic calming. Is that all going to speed tables, or are we looking at different opportunities for traffic calming?
So one of the things that you'll notice in the legislation that we move forward is that we call everything traffic calming, just to give us the options. If something else is needed, we can do the something else. When we change code to allow vertical deflection on arterials and collectors, we don't do speed tables, we do speed cushions. Now, that sounds like geek speak, but it's a different design that allows the fire trucks to move through. And so our plan was, we know where the issues are, let's study it, but let's not tie our hands by calling it something like a speed table in case it's not needed, it's something else that's needed.
Yeah, and I know we've made some progress there over the past year. It was great to see that Baker Road, which is not a local road, which is only what would be approved historically, was approved for tables, but we were also told, as we are every year, because a contract isn't procured until October, November, and then they go out and do all work on this backlog, and then 4 months later, it's before the fiscal year is over, we're out of money. So is having that $10 million in T-SPLOS going to prevent us and other applicants in our districts from being told we're out of money excuse?
Yeah, so that's actually going to change on both fronts. So with the creation of the Transportation Infrastructure Trust Fund, that money goes into the fund and then survives the fiscal year. That was a real challenge we had, is that everything seemed to start in Q4 and then the clock just ran out. This now enables us to just do the work, whereas on the T-SPLOS side, that's like cash in the bank. And so it doesn't know the artificial, time constraints that we have on the budget cycle, which is why really when you saw a number of the old public works projects, they struggled because they were having to authorize funding on an annual basis for multi-year projects, which is just a recipe for disaster. We take the approach that when we have all the money, we move forward. So we do still, the contracting is still not where I would like it, where, I mean, we can't enter a contract until we have the budget, but it's still the same process where the minute this budget is approved, we'll put the bid out for speed tables. And I know last year we had to reject the bids because we didn't like the prices, and we ended up doing some of them under an emergency procurement because the situation was dire enough that we just couldn't keep waiting for a bid to come in, and that's where we talked to the procurement department. They agreed that they would approve that emergency.
Next subject is bridges. I know you touched on those. I know there are some specific bridge replacements and T-Splost. I believe there's also a pot for a general pot in T-Splost.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the general pot in T-Splost and your general pot here in the general fund, because I believe the only specific bridge that was funded in T-Splost in District 9 was the Marietta Road Bridge, the northernmost Marietta Road Bridge. There's another Marietta Road Bridge that needs either repair or replacement. We've talked many, many times about Marietta Boulevard and driven across it. And then there's 3 bridges between mine and Councilmember Norwood's district that were built before the Great Depression.
Right.
And
right.
one we saw that someone had almost obliterated.
Smashed into, yeah.
That needs either replacement or repair. So talk to me about our bridges and how we're going to move forward with those. Because I know this is a nationwide and statewide issue, not just
so on the general fund side, the plan has always been those funds go towards basic bridge needs, repairing a parapet wall, repairing a bridge joint, but what has been happening is that we're having these catastrophic bridge issues, and we're basically dumping the whole bridge budget into singular items. And so 2 years ago, we ended up spending the vast majority of the bridge budget on Spring Street. This past year, we took a big chunk of it and put it into Cheshire Bridge. And so the thought being on the T-Splost side that bridges are very attractive for federal funding. We need local match. And so we've done our best to federalize the bridges that we think will be attractive at that level. And so can we use that money for local match? That's what we're thinking there. We'd like to get it back to the point where the bridge replacements are coming from a bond or a T-Splost, and then we're back to doing the basics with the general fund money, which, we keep a list of, it's of just all the little maintenance items that are needed on the bridge. We seem to have a lot of bridge joint issues where we have to get in. And your bridge, we actually canceled the award.
Which one?
Marietta Boulevard, the whole. We weren't 5 minutes into the job, and we got a change order from the contractor, so we just canceled it and said we'll try this again. That was
skip down to another one of my questions, but go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's been one that everybody seems to think they're going to get rich off of it, and it may come where you see a new bridge before you see that little section of deck repaired.
And so specifically to the 2 bridges I'm thinking of that, I don't know if you or your bridge, Mr. Ayo, has done an assessment yet of the Ridgewood Road Bridge that we went and saw. But what is in this budget sufficient to repair that Ridgewood Road Bridge? And I believe the southernmost Marietta Road Bridge needs a joint repair because there's been a steel plate there for a few years.
there's budget that would cover those repairs. I would need to follow up on the specifics of where we are, but that's the type of routine item that this budget is intended to cover.
Yeah, so on to contracting. Since you brought it up, I'll go to it first. It was actually my last question, but across not just transportation, but across departments, it's ridiculous, these problems we're having with contractors. In Deem, I had a fire station that isn't getting built because someone wanted multi-million-dollar change order. Watershed, they got a change order not an hour into it, but a month or two into one of their projects, where the contractor wanted, millions of dollars for things like furniture. I'm like, well, this is a 4-year project. How How do
Right.
you know how much furniture is going to cost in 4 years? So how are we holding those contractors accountable? Are we? And is that something that falls on the department or procurement to make sure that we document these? And if people want to play games with the city, then we're going to show that we don't want to play ball with them anymore.
Yeah, so we've experienced a good bit of that, and have had our own fights to deal with. I think it's what you're seeing is this old school trick of go low to come back and make it up with change orders. And one department agency that does it really well that we've borrowed from, is the airport. And so we've used a lot of their best value documents. And so we look at things now when we put projects out to bid, we want to see a project management plan. We want to see a schedule. We want to see a safety plan. And if you can't do the most basic plans, we don't want you to do the work. It's interesting, if you look at city code as it stands today, there are 11 selection factors when you put something out to bid. Cost is number 11. 1 through 10 is past experience with city, past experience with other owners. And so, we experience that ourselves, this let's go low to try to make it back up. We also experience a number of contractors who don't know how to do road work. And the one we see the most is we get change order requests for utility delays. Well, they're not entitled to monies for utility delays. That's a GDOT spec. That's a state level thing. And so we started saying no and fighting these change orders, and we had a number of them sue us. We're undefeated as we sit here today, and I think this is just part of Atlanta's growing process that we do need to look at what's the risk of change on these projects. Some of this can go back to how we're designing them. Some of this is how we're setting up these documents. And just with the volatility in the marketplace, we know that we're going to see some of that. And we need to be ready for it. And so we've had a number of them who've hit us pretty hard. And what has been interesting, and I won't name the project, but we had one early on where we received a frivolous change order. We said no. And a week later, it was on the news, City of Atlanta is not paying its bills. And our response was, you're right. We don't pay what they're not entitled to. And so I think there's just sort of this, that there are times where it feels like Atlanta needs to be just the big, cold, impersonal city that it should be, and it's in dealing with these contracts. But it's always the go low to come back. And so what we've guarded against is we're now saying, let's measure pricing versus our engineer's estimate, not relative to each other, so that we can get the best value, because just because you get a price that's 40% below your estimate doesn't mean that you just got a discount. It means you're going to have a miserable, miserable time for the duration of that project. And we have to be ready to say, this is really what value means. And a lot of that's going to come back to their track record. The other thing that we're looking at is our projects are simple enough. We want to do more design build. And that way you have one stop shop for who you blame when something goes wrong. It's not a contractor blaming a designer and a designer blaming us. It's one entity, and we can hold them accountable. And I think you're going to see more of that. I don't dare speak on the other departments, but my stuff's simple enough that we could really move pretty quickly doing design builds, and then that kind of shortens the procurement cycle too.
My last question, and we've touched on this before, some of our departments very successfully use on-call contractors for, not a minor issue that can be handled in-house, but it's not really rise to the level of a capital project that needs to be procured independently. We've had talks, Bolton Road comes to mind with the section of it that needs repair, and we had to talk about doing emergency procurement. However, other departments have successfully used, on-call contractors for these, kind of moderate, mid-level jobs of really just basic maintenance. So does this budget at all help move us in that direction?
So it may on the bridge side. So we too have on-call contractors, but it's generally specific to the lane of work that they do. So we'll have an on-call striper, or we'll have an on-call bridge repair. What we don't have are the on-call generalists. And that was an area that we've talked about looking into, that could we have essentially the equivalent of an IDIQ where we select 3 or 4 different companies. And this was actually something I did with another jurisdiction years ago, where we had 3 generalists on call, and then they would each go out and look, and we would select who gave us the most competitive price. We're not there yet with that. And what you're seeing on Bolton is a highlight of where we need that. And we don't have necessarily the emergency singular task. Maybe we have some emergency signal stuff, but usually it's a number of items. And Bolton's a great example because it's, we actually had a bridge that was dropping aggregate onto the road. Our pavement's torn up. There are some drainage issues around the bridge, and so there's a lot that needs to be done that really is too much for any one of our on-calls to do, and we can't cobble them together into a team. So I would say moving forward, we do need to look at how we get some of these generalists just under contract where we can issue task orders and dispatch them for that. And that's work that's too big for us right now to do in-house.
All right, well, thank you, Commissioner, for today and for your years of service to the city.
Thank you, sir.
Hate to see you go, but we'll still hope to get go have some lunch every once in a while. And,
without a doubt.
Depending on what your next role is, I may have a list for you there too. Okay?
Oh, I have no doubt I could move to the West Coast and you would have a list for me. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, we're all very sad that you will not be with us much longer. But I want to ask you, what advice do you give us on the department maximizing repairs and efficiency? I know you get requests from council members, you get 311 calls, you get things that are on the list that are not on the list, emergencies. What could you tell us to be helpful to get the best and most efficient results from your crews that are working out there?
Yeah, I think at the very, very simple level, we really appreciate the more aggressive people are with 311. And there's an education process needed, because quite often we'll get something like, I need a new bridge in my neighborhood on 311. Well, that's never going to happen. So we've talked about what is 311able. And I think there's a push needed there to say, here are the types of things that you can submit on 311 and turn people loose. That's I think your base level. And we did something similar with one neighborhood and walked with them and said, here are the things you need to look at. Even the day we walked Tuxedo Park, I think I found 20 things that we then submitted for 311 tickets, and helped people see that this is something we can do, that's something we can do. But as we get into these, I think about Habersham Valley. That's not a 311 thing, but it's something we're fully capable of doing. So how we manage that interface, I think, is yet to be determined. But it came about just through robust conversation with the community in your office and kind of working out what was the best solution there. But as we move into these safety and operational projects, I see a need to have a prioritization type scheme, because like I mentioned before, in 3 months, I'm pushing 20, I called it the commissioner's list. I have 20 of these almost, and it's from Councilmember Hillis on Bolton Road to the work we did with Councilmember Boone with the culvert replacement on Veltree, that these are things that can turn quickly and should turn quickly, but I don't know that we've figured that out yet. And so we need to figure out how we real quickly classify those, get them scheduled, and then talk about the budget ramifications, because what I'm going to predict is that the demand is going to grow quickly, and that probably next year at this time you're going to have a list of these to say, I want these items funded. That's a work in progress, but what I like is it's all being delivered by in-house resources.
Right.
So we have the people, we have the equipment, then it's the material cost. So we're able to move more quickly there. But we like lists. And you gave us a great list, and we went through it and said, here are the things we can do now, here are the things that are capital projects, and so the time you took to prepare that list really helped us get those things scheduled and prioritized.
Got it. I also wanted to ask you about, we've got terrible traffic in this town, and if your guys are going from one end of the city to a whole different part of the city in the same day for two different projects that showed up on their list at the same time, is there anything that can be done to organize that on Monday we are in this part of the city, on Tuesday, or however you would do it, but to maximize and minimize that time in traffic and cross town?
Yes, ma'am. We try to group those 311 tickets so that they're batching them in common geographic areas. One of the things that we did a year ago that I think warrants some revisiting is we actually started on Cascade and just moved from the city limits on down to about Ralph David Abernathy and just fixed everything we could find to fix.
Okay.
Then we moved to 10th Street and we just fixed everything we could find to fix. Then we went to West Paces Ferry, and it was interesting because I think we ended up spending about 2.5 months on West Paces Ferry. There was just so much wrong with it. Now, is it resurfaced? No. But it's passable, it's functioning, and so the crews just stayed up there. They started at I-75, went into Buckhead, turned around and came back, and just fixed everything they could find to fix. And I think that goes back to Councilmember Hillis's question, that if we focus on arterials and collectors, that's really where we need to be spending time. So there's that geographic overlay, but there's also the functional class of the street and where's the most use coming from. So you're right. We've got a big city and we try to coordinate things geographically, but it's interesting because sometimes we can't have repair that stretches us around the city, and that's just that's part of it.
Got it. Thank you. And thank you for your service to our city. We
Yes,
all
ma'am.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have Ms. Bakhtiari, then Ms. Boone, and then I will make some potentially concluding remarks.
Hey, Commissioner.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you.
Couple questions. I mean, my colleagues have asked a majority of them, and I apologize if I'm being redundant and missed questions that were already asked. A couple questions. One, in my short time here, you've been amazing, and I've appreciated everything you've done.
Well, thank you.
I also still think you shouldn't leave, so stay forever, at least for the next 4 years.
Gotcha.
One quick question I had. I was curious. Can I ask why there was why there was a pothole posse formed and brought back instead of, I don't know, forming like a sidewalk strike team?
I wouldn't answer that one. I know that depending on where you are in town, there's sort of these concentrations of what gets people's temperature up. And you're in a part of town that sidewalk gets people's temperature up. And I used to ask the question, if you could pave a street or build a sidewalk, which would you do? And it's you have parts of town that they'll flip. And so your district, you hear a lot of build the sidewalk, we don't care about the streets. In fact, many of your constituents see potholes as traffic calming. We came up with the phrase, it's a speed hole. And so then you go to other parts of town and it's, I don't walk, my road's terrible, I want my street fixed. Or you don't have sidewalks. Yeah. and so, I think you could win with either one. You could have a sidewalk strike force or you could have a pothole posse. Both are very much needed. What led to one versus the other, I don't know, but both are very much in demand.
I'm all for a pothole posse on arterial roads, but sidewalks, as we know, drastically improve quality of life and allow for multimodal connectivity and lead to less pedestrian deaths and also just general safety. So, but of course, I'm preaching to somebody who is the commissioner of ATL DOT. So,
well, and what I would say though is that quite often the response is related to the feedback we're getting. Mm-hmm. And we do get a lot of feedback about, and you see it. I've talked with folks like now Propel ATL about should we start naming
Formerly Atlanta Bicycle Coalition.
formerly Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, should we start having naming ceremonies for ADA ramps? And when you see things in social media, it's always, what's the worst pothole in Atlanta? What's the worst street? I mean, Atlanta Magazine just did one. And I never respond on social media, but I did. And I said, does human life count? Because if it is, Moreland's the worst. But everyone was responding based on, their perceived pavement quality. So we have this hyper focus on pavement quality. Yeah, maybe it's necessary. I don't know. But if we start shifting the focus to people, then we're looking at things like the sidewalks, especially crosswalks, and how are we making this city more walkable? That's where I was trying to reside. But I will say that the pavement condition is still the topic of conversation. I have friends of mine who don't even know where the city limits are, who are complaining about their streets, and I have to remind them they live in Gwinnett County. And so I get more complaints about pavement quality than anything else.
I guess, one of the things that we've discussed is that there needs to be a shift of focus to arterial roads instead of these one-offs on side streets, because we'll just continuously deplete our accounts by doing that instead of maintaining main thoroughfares, which by doing so prevent cut-throughs on side roads, which prevents the degradation of those roads, and the arterial roads, and keeping those upkept will actually end up improving everything as a whole. Do you feel as though you've been supported in that shift?
Yeah, the thing is that a lot of the shifts that we made, we were able to make the argument with the data that we had available to us, because the other thing that you look at, if you compare a local street to an arterial street, your likelihood for severe crash is also 18 times higher on the arterial. And so everything screams address the arterials. Now, those are messier and more challenging, but that's where the attention needs to lie. And so certainly have had the support, have not had much, if any, pushback on that, because we see it. And I know it was about 2 years ago that the whole Georgia Tech 10th Street thing came up, that it was like, how are you guys not paving 10th Street, but you're doing all these one-off streets? Right. And so, and you're seeing it now. Now we're moving forward, and Spring was one that we did. We just finished Lowry, so we're getting these more highly used streets and getting out of this kind of getting back into deep into the neighborhoods, and that was simply the decisions were based on what scored worst. Worst was done first, but it wasn't taking into account things like the traffic volume or the relative risk that the repair represented.
I guess one of my questions is, as we're talking about the last mile, as we're talking about Vision Zero, recognizing how we accomplish multimodal connectivity throughout the city to offset, as Councilmember Norwood brought up, our horrible traffic, to address our lack of ADA accessibility as a city. What do you feel? I mean, I know that ATL DOT has tried to take steps in that direction, but what do you think we need to be prioritizing?
So it's been a bit of a journey for me, and where I've landed is that I think senior mobility catches everything, and you look at it. I used to use my mother as the example, that she wasn't going to ride a bike, she wasn't going to ride a scooter, she didn't want to drive, she wasn't going to wait out in the heat for the bus, and she was only going to walk so far. And so that really creates challenges for us. Now, she would walk further if it wasn't so hot in the summertime. Now, we're talking about simple things like what New Orleans did with trees and shade. She would have no issue riding the bus, but she doesn't want to wait at a bus stop for an hour. And so I think as you look at, and I said it before, the 8-year-olds and the 80-year-olds, that what are the things that enable them? I'll share. It's been a personal journey for me with my son as you start looking at what neurodiversity means in our transportation system. And I mean, I have a 5-year-old son who just wanders into traffic because of his autism, he doesn't recognize the risk. And so I don't think that things like that should be a death sentence, because you happen to wander into the street. So now we're back to combating speed. And I think that's where we are. It's interesting to me because I've also become convinced that congestion's so horrible, the congestion's really bad. What that is code for is that I'm not able to drive recklessly 80 miles an hour down the street. That's what people want to do. They want to drive 80 miles an hour down the street, and the pandemic proved it because the crash rates are up, the fatalities are up at a time when congestion was down. And so we didn't behave responsibly. We didn't enjoy the lower volumes and just travel at a safe speed. We hammered down and we created all kinds of havoc, the collective we. And so stay focused on that speed. Slower is safer. And then how are our 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds moving through this city? I had said before, it seems like each city wants to be known for something. And with an aging population, and maybe I'm being a little self-serving because I'm counting my years as I move up, but what if Atlanta provides the most mobility options for seniors? What a wonderful place this would be. Right. It's already a wonderful place. What a more wonderful place it would be.
Thank you. Something that we constantly discuss with some of our newer commissioners. You've been with us for a few years now. We have our watershed, all these different commissioners, DPW and et cetera, that are talking about having to, restructure their departments. And I'm curious as to how many obsolete contracts you had to end when you when you were forming ATL DOT and shifting towards that out of DPW, how many contracts there were that were just repeatedly paid out with little to no oversight that we ended up having to.
So we didn't so ours wasn't as much financial as it was quality. Mm-hmm. My frustration on day one was I didn't feel like some of the people that were hired to produce were producing. And so I am a huge proponent of peer review. And so rather than taking the fight directly to them, I brought people in from the industry who I knew who were just going to be relatively cutthroat and ruthless to start reviewing the work of others. And so it became sort of this self-leveling type experience, and it was pretty rough at first. I wouldn't say that we were just paying bills to pay bills. There was some pushback that we had to learn how to do with the utility companies. They oftentimes take a posture that they have prior rights and we have to prove them wrong. We brought in resources from the outside to do that. And then as we had just talked about with Councilmember Hillis, it was the frivolous change order. We got a lot of those, and we started learning how to say no. And then we started learning how to not be afraid of getting sued and how to fight back. And ultimately, it's how you document your projects. And it's interesting because for us, it became a process question. How do we build the project management process to address these risks? So, but yeah, for us, it was really more on the quality side, and how do we get what we're paying for?
Okay. Like I said, colleagues answered a majority of questions that I wanted to ask. In my short time here, it's very clear that you've built an incredible department, and that your loss is going to be a major one. I think one of the things I'm most curious about is what you are most concerned about happening when you leave.
So, one of the things for anyone who's known me through my career is that I was telling this story today. Years ago, two young engineers and I were doing work for a client. We had never done the work before. We had to buy a new piece of equipment. We were literally sitting on the curb reading the manual, trying to figure out how to do this work. And at the end of the day, I asked these two young engineers, I said, so what do you think would enable us to move faster? And one of them just looked me in the eye and said, you need to stay home. And it kind of made me mad. And he said, look, you're good at identifying opportunity, bringing the right people to the table, but you're slow. Get out of the way. And so by the end of the week, these two guys had increased the output 15x versus having me there. And that kind of launched my journey that I am good at, fixing things, putting process in place. I love recruiting people. I love seeing team members succeed. And so when you look at DOT, I won't prattle off the names just yet, but our bench runs about 30 people deep. We have amassed a good collection of talent. And so the thing that concerns me the most is just simply I want them to continue to have the confidence in themselves to make the decisions they need to make. I'm a very pro team member leader. I've got their back at all costs. I learned this from a lady I used to work with. We called her Mama Bear. You just didn't attack her cubs. And so I'm proud of the team I have.
Josh, are you Mama Bear?
I am Mama Bear. And so I think they're going to continue to do great. I think they're going to need support and encouragement and resources. And you'll look back in 5, 6, 7 years, and if my track record holds true, you're going to say, well, Rowan was pretty good. He got us started, but these folks are awesome. And they've taken us to new levels. And they will always have my commitment and their future success. So I won't be far. I may not be holding the clipboard on the sidelines, but there's a very strong team behind me. And I sit here today because of that team. And so I'm not that charismatic leader who this place falls apart because I'm not here. I've enjoyed success because of the men and women in DOT who take a lot of pride in their work. And, you know, I've said it before, and I guess I'll get a little mouthy today. You know, we've said you have one characteristic to be at Atlanta DOT. You got to be a badass. We've got some great people who are going to do good things.
And ATL DOT team, I see some of you there. If you try to mass exodus, I swear to you, don't you dare.
They won't.
Josh has already signed over your fate to all of us. You have to stay here another 10 years minimum. You can't go anywhere.
This is the opportunity they've been preparing for. It's their turn.
Fair enough.
I had my turn. It's their turn.
Well, you know I'll be bothering you weekly, no matter where you end up. But I do have one last question, because we spoke to some of the fatality site visits. Is there a possibility of us assembling a safe street squad to create quick responses? Is there a way for us to build a team within ATL DOT to create quick response projects to locations where we have had increased pedestrian fatalities, like along Moreland Memorial and other streets?
Yeah, I believe we have the resources to make that happen. It's going to be, you know, where do our priorities lie? Mm-hmm. And even, I'm going to go back to District 8 with Councilmember Norwood. We had somebody from the operations team, somebody from the capital team, and somebody from the planning team all look at an issue, and within about 15 minutes, they, back of the Krispy Kreme napkin, came up with a plan, and 2 months later, they'd done the work. So we have that ability. We intentionally went out and poached a great designer, Chris Rome, from the private sector. We have design capabilities. We're shifting our maintenance and operations to be more like in-house construction. So we have those abilities. Then it's just going to be, where do the priorities lie?
What are the steps that we can take to go ahead and where council can take to go ahead and set that up so that we can ensure that we have that infrastructure in place? Because it's great that we are trying to, that we're focusing on arterial roads, et cetera, but we still do not have the bicycle safety. As much as Atlanta loves to paint a bicycle symbol down the middle of the street, that doesn't make a protected bike lane. And surprise, surprise, people are still hit by cars. So in response to that, by the way, that was not a dig at you. In response to that, what can we do to make steps towards making that a priority within the department?
One of the things that I had started with down the path, and I think this should continue with Rebecca Cerna, formerly ABC, now Propel ATL, is we were actually going to sites where there were pedestrian fatalities. And we were assessing, what was in the police report, how did it happen, and then what could be done now. And there weren't total solutions in front of us, but the one that really it haunts me a little bit was on Cheshire Bridge Road right at the interstate. 25-year-old young lady standing in the middle of the road got hit by a car. And what was weird is it looked like there was an effort to add some capacity to turn left onto the interstate. So essentially what was a striped median became an extension of a left turn lane, and it couldn't hold more than 3 cars. So we basically said that, okay, those 3 cars turning is the most important thing to us. I've taken some flack through the years for being a big fan of medians. It really does at times come down to left turns versus medians, but there was some striping needed. I think a small median could have been built. Probably some work done to the signal to add some pedestrian phases, but it was a really bad situation. And then we pulled the crash data, and it's just horrendous. That wasn't actually the only fatality in that location. There had been another fatality. And so I think we've got to be looking at these hot spots, and they're very challenging and they're very complex, but there are things that we can do now that do make it incrementally better, but then we also have to be committed to go get the longer-term fix funded. And I think that's going to be where we turn to the state and say, we need your help.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Certainly. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Commissioner Rowan. Appreciate the whole ATL DOT bench. Thank y'all.
Commissioner, thank you so much for being accessible. You and I spent 3 to 4 hours touring Southwest Atlanta during the Light Up the Night process. Waite Drive, Westview, Town Hall meeting, coffee with the Commissioner, Burton Road, Delmar Lane, Kelso at Peyton, Mays Manor, and the list goes on and on and on. And on behalf of those members of those communities, we thank you for all that you have done. Who should we contact after July 1st to make sure that all of those promises, especially Dollar Mill, we've been working on that one a long time. We put a lot of energy and time, and our heart went into Dollar Mill Road and Boulder Park. And you were just accessible to those neighbors that have been there for nearly 50 years. So what will happen on Dollar Mill Road now?
So Dollar Mill specifically, we're trying to put that out as a design build and spend your renew money to get that one done. So you can work with Jessica on that one. To the bigger picture, I'm working with the administration on what things look like in the interim. So there's more forthcoming on that. But the players in DOT. We had moved in the direction, and this is another incomplete task, but I do think it's an important one, where we recognize that we needed more resources when it came to council interaction. So we've made some moves to start building a team that is just specifically for interacting with council, and so we can get you connected there, because I think once they better understand the needs of the community and the capabilities of the department, and I did an experiment with the technical team where we called them area engineers, but what we found is it was really more people management than it was technical management. And so now we're moving in a direction where we have just good people who can get out into the community, understand what needs to be done, and then come translate that for the technical team. So that's in progress, and we can show you what we have planned there and can probably get some of your feedback to incorporate.
Well, Commissioner, you were an amazing and incredible leader. And again, thank you so much for passing our way.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. I had a whole list of incisive budget questions I'll refrain from asking, except for one. Did I read right that you have no funded vacancies?
That's correct.
I mean, are you employees working under articles of indenture? How do you pull that off?
Well, like I had mentioned before, we have some backfill that we have to do, some folks who have left that we've filled. But again, our priority this year was really on retention and start boosting the pay. I would share, and I know I've joked with the mayor's team and the finance. It's like when my CEO used to ask me, "Are you busy?" Well, that was a loaded question. If I told him yes, he told me I was a poor manager and learned how to delegate. And if I told him no, he said, "Well, what am I paying you for?" We've hit a nice number. I think there are going to be some folks that we'll be advocating for as we go forward, because we do the ability we have now is, if you look at the weird percentages, we have some people who are split funded, T-SPLOS, general fund. We're going to have to build a team for the 2.0 program, and I think that's going to be some opportunities for people to step up. So, but you're correct. It's zero funded vacancies.
All right. Well, I'll toss my bouquet, and then we'll let you move on. It goes without saying that you're going to miss these group budget hearings. Well, on behalf of my constituents, and I'll bet you're the most widely seen commissioner in this city, because you've sat in so many living rooms, you've walked around, you've walked miles with neighbors and neighborhood leaders, and so you're leaving with a reputation that very few can say they've earned here. I will simply say that if you're serious about having your ashes spread on Spring Street, you better get procurement working on that now. All right. Anything else? I think we've worn ourselves out saying we're going to miss you.
No, thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Exeunt omnes. The March of the Departments will conclude tomorrow, beginning at 10 with the executive offices. See you then.
And on Friday at noon, we have a reception for Commissioner Rowan. So everyone come to the old council chambers Friday at noon.
And don't tell my wife how I really behave when I'm at work. I lie when I go home.
Right. And we'll also hear from grants management, and we'll discuss the dreaded personnel paper as well tomorrow. So thank you.